What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, bringing you my reaction video to the third round of this year's NHL playoffs for 2013. Of course, we have the Eastern and Western Conference Championship Series to talk about for a little bit. We have our Stanley Cup Finals matchup. Just right out of the gate, I'll let you know, in the Eastern and Western Conference Championship Series, I was 1-1, which brings my overall playoff predicting record to 8 correct and 6 incorrect. I would certainly like to be better, but I don't think I'll overly argue with 8 and 6. The ones that I've gotten wrong, I understand why I've gotten them wrong, so, you know, it's all a learning experience, right? So I'm 8 and 6 so far, predicting the Stanley Cup playoffs, and let's talk about the Eastern and Western Conference Championships. In the Eastern Conference, we had a 1v4 matchup of the number 1 ranked Pittsburgh Penguins taking on the number 4 ranked Boston Bruins, and Boston pulled the upset and pulled it in very convincing fashion. I don't know that a team could play a more perfect series than Boston did. The Boston Bruins at number 4 defeat the number 1 Pittsburgh Penguins in a 4-game sweep, 4-0 by scores of 3-0, 6-1, 2-1, and 1-0 in the series-clinching game. So I had the incorrect team here because I picked the Pittsburgh Penguins to win this series. I also picked this series to be won in 5 games, and it was won in 4, so I was -1 game on that. Top scorers for the Bruins so far in the playoffs, David Krejci continues to lead the entire NHL playoffs in points with 21. Nathan Horton in this series had the most points for the Bruins with 5. On Pittsburgh's side of things, they finished with Evgeny Malkin and Chris Letang co-leading the team with 16 points apiece. Paul Martin, actually, surprisingly, had the most points for Pittsburgh in this series with 2. It's no surprise to anybody why Pittsburgh lost this series. They only generated 2 goals in 4 games, and that's due to the style that Boston plays. It's due, in main part, though, really to Tuukka Rask. I mean, Tuukka Rask just played a phenomenal series. How can you... I don't think you can fault Tuukka Rask for anything that he did in those 4 games. And he really put an exclamation point on why he is the front runner for the Conn Smythe. 134 saves on 136 shots. So it's not like Pittsburgh was completely stifled. Pittsburgh was getting their shots, including one game, I believe it was game 3, where they had over 50 shots. So it's not like Pittsburgh wasn't getting their opportunities, because they were. 136 shots in 4 games. What is that? 34 shots a game, I believe, is what that averages out to. So it's not like they're not getting their chances. But Tuukka Rask was just solid and couldn't be shaken and just played unbelievable, especially in the last 2 games. Because in those last 2 games, you know, Boston only scored 3 goals. They scored 3 goals in 2 games, won both of those games. So it was absolutely Tuukka Rask. I mean, Tuukka Rask is really the primary story in this series. Only 5 Pittsburgh Penguins players generated points in this series. That is crazy. You know what's even crazier? Not one of them are named Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Jarome Iginla, James Neal, Chris Letang. Not one of them generated 1 point in this series. That is the very definition of being shut down, and it's crazy to think that a team so talent-rich, whose window is really closing because you have all these young star stud players who in the next couple of seasons their contracts are coming up, and it's gonna cost league best money to keep them. And I don't think, I mean, there's no way Pittsburgh keeps this team together. There's no way they re-sign Iginla, because Iginla's contract's done at the end of this year, and his cap hit is not going to be conducive to Pittsburgh re-signing him, especially with the cap going down to whatever it's going down to, I think 63.4 or 64.3 or something like that. There's no way that Pittsburgh is re-signing Malkin. So not Malkin, sorry, Iginla. But this team's window is really closing here, and this might have been their best shot. Unfortunately, could not get it done against just almost feels like a team of destiny. They went down to overtime in the first round and damn near lost it, and now they're all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals. And despite being like really badly out-hit, I was really surprised to see that Pittsburgh badly out-hit Boston in this series. I don't have the exact numbers on it, but I was surprised to see that Pittsburgh played a more physical game than Boston did. But Boston just took Pittsburgh's heart really early in this series. You're talking outscoring them 10-1 in the first two games. That just really just sucked the heart right out of the Penguins, especially where it was on Vokoun, and I've been singing Vokoun's praises all playoffs. I just think Boston just took Pittsburgh's heart, and by the time it got to Game 3, and Pittsburgh decided, okay, we've lost the first two games in this series and been outscored, I said 10-1 earlier, but it was actually 9-1. Being outscored 9-1 in the first two games, maybe we better get our asses in gear. And Pittsburgh gave Boston their absolute best shot in Game 3. And Boston weathered it. They didn't get frustrated. They didn't get scared. I think a lot of teams, when they play a team like Pittsburgh, get scared because you look on the other side of the ice. You've got Crosby, you've got Malkin, you've got Iginla, you've got James Neal, who's just a gangster. You know, you have these great players on the other side, and I honestly think teams get scared. So they lose the mental battle. It's like wrestling the Undertaker. They lose the mental battle right away, and then that's it. Boston didn't lose the mental battle. Boston knows what they have as a team, and they weathered that storm, and they did what they needed to do to get that win 2-1, and then went into Game 4. Game 4 was another great game, another really close game, and Boston just takes it, and that was the end of the series. Just a very surprising series. I certainly didn't think I could have bought Boston beating Pittsburgh. I would have found it very hard to think of a scenario where Boston swept Pittsburgh. But there it was. So the Boston Bruins, at number 4 in the East, are moving on to the Stanley Cup Finals. Who are they going to face? In the Western Conference, we had a 1-5 matchup of the number 1 ranked Chicago Blackhawks, President's Trophy winning Chicago Blackhawks, versus the number 5 ranked Los Angeles Kings, last year's Stanley Cup champions. Now in that series, the favorites, the Chicago Blackhawks, played a very dominant style, and really at no real point in the series did I really feel like Chicago was threatened. Maybe I'm not giving LA quite enough credit there, but I just really didn't think they felt all that threatened. Chicago beats Los Angeles 4-1 by scores of 3-2, 2-1, 4-2, 1-3 in the one game that Chicago lost, and 4-3 in the series-clinching 5th game. Now, I had the correct team here. I did pick that the Chicago Blackhawks were going to win. I thought Chicago was going to win this series in 6 games, so it was -1 game on the predictions. Top scorers for the Blackhawks, Patrick Sharp and Marian Hossa, continue to co-lead the team with 14 points apiece. Shockingly enough, Brian Bickle, on a team that's got Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, Marian Hossa, Patrick Sharp. On that team, Brian Bickle led the Chicago Blackhawks with 7 points in 5 games. Pretty great numbers there for old Bick. On the Kings side of things, Slava Voinov and Jeff Carter co-lead the team. They end the playoffs co-leading the team, I should say, with 13 points apiece. Slava Voinov with 6 points in 5 games in this series. The main thing here, and I mentioned it in the prediction video too, Chicago was able to top that dreaded sort of 3-goal plateau. Like, teams have found it very, very hard to score a second or even into a third goal on the Kings this year. They topped that 3-goal plateau versus Jonathan Quick 3 times, which is very nice. They allowed 3 goals in Game 5, and they still won. Remember, Los Angeles was riding that long streak of if they scored more than 2 goals, they won the game. And they were streaking on that, pretty hot on that for a little while. But they allowed 3 goals in the series-deciding 5th game and still won the game. So Chicago seemed to take everything away from Los Angeles in this series. They beat LA in LA, which nobody has been able to do for the longest time. Awesome. They topped that 3-goal plateau 3 times in the series. They allowed 3 goals in Game 5, and they still won. So everything that you could say almost about the Los Angeles Kings, Chicago was just like, meh, we'll snap those streaks. And that's really what they did. So they went out and they really just took everything away from Los Angeles in this series. Blackhawks, of course, won all 3 games in Chicago in this series, and this is the reason why the Kings are not going to the Stanley Cup Finals. Some people have mentioned to me that, like, you know, maybe you're a little dependent on talking about home versus away and stuff like that. The LA Kings lost 6 straight road games in the playoffs. They only won 1 road game all through the playoffs, and that was in their first round series against St. Louis. But they lost 6 in a row. They shouldn't have beat the San Jose Sharks. I'll put it that way. You can't lose 6 straight games on the road in the playoffs and expect to get anywhere. So LA has got to figure out how to play away from LA if they want to get back to where they were last year. Jonathan Quick can certainly not be blamed for the Kings losing this series. Yes, he allowed 13 goals in 5 games, which is still less than 3 goals a game, which I think a lot of goalies in the NHL would take that if they had the chance. 13 goals against on 145 shots, so he still had a .910 save percentage. So he's definitely not the reason why the Kings lost this series. The Kings lost this series because of a lack of impact scoring on their part. What did they generate? 2, 3, 5, 8... 11 goals in 5 games. So just a little, just barely over 2 goals a game. And I think when you're playing the President's Trophy winning team, you got to generate a little bit more than that. And LA simply was not able to. That's partly on LA, and that's mostly because of the way Chicago plays. The Blackhawks rode their awesome penalty kill. I think it's up in the 95% area, something like that. So, I mean, it's really up there. They rode their awesome penalty kill, their top star. And I think if you look at that team and you look at the stars, it's really tempting to say that Jonathan Toews is the top star on this team. I would find it hard to come up with an argument to say Patrick Kane is not this team's top star, and they rode him. He had a hat trick in the series deciding game, I believe it was, including, I believe, the series clinching goal, and Corey Crawford. And I am so impressed with Corey Crawford, because Corey Crawford always kind of had that, I guess, that stigma that followed him, that he allows weak goals, that maybe he's a bit of a mental midget, that, you know, if he gets behind, he gets frustrated and he lets it get to him. Corey Crawford is one of the top positional goaltenders in the NHL. He has eliminated the lion's share of those weak goals. Every goaltender is going to allow a junky goal here and there. But now the difference between Corey Crawford of 2 years ago and Corey Crawford now is that Corey Crawford does not allow those goals to get to him anymore. He centers himself, mentally puts it out of his mind, and moves forward. And that's what the great goaltenders are able to do. And I think Corey Crawford is now starting to build a legacy of great games, and he's going to start building that legacy of being one of the top goaltenders in the NHL. We don't often talk about Corey Crawford in terms of top goalies in the NHL. Corey Crawford's got to start sneaking into that conversation here somewhere, because Corey Crawford absolutely is one of the top guys in the league. So there you have it. Eastern Conference number 4 ranked Boston Bruins, Western Conference number 1 ranked Chicago Blackhawks. That is your Stanley Cup final, a matchup of 2 Stanley Cup champions from recent memory, which is very, very cool to see. This is going to be an excellent series. How do I think it's going to go? You'll have to tune into the next video, the one that I'm going to put out right after this one, for my Stanley Cup Championship prediction. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. Check you on the next video.